It is good to see everyone out this evening, considering it is Super Bowl Sunday. A couple of us were joking this morning, so I could set my cell phone up here and give updates as we went through. But I said, I don't think we'll have to do that. We ought to be out of here in a timely manner. If you would open your Bibles up to James chapter 1 this evening. This is something that Bob has hit on here recently, and it seems like some would say we're beating a dead horse, but we're really not. We're in a day and time and in a society where people speak before they think. And for the few moments we have together this evening, I want us to think about this, and particularly from the book of James. But in James chapter 1, verses 26 and 27. James says, beginning verse 26, he says, "If anyone among you thinks he is religious and does not bridle his tongue, but deceives his own heart, this one's religion is useless. Pure and undefiled religion before God and the Father is this, to visit orphans and widows in their troubles, and to keep oneself unspotted from the world." I want us to think about this. How often do we say something before we think? We don't think about it, whether it's correct or it's incorrect, how it's going to affect those who hear it, how it's going to affect us. I've heard Bob talk about this and give the illustration. We're driving down the road, someone cuts us off. What's the first thing we want to do? We want to blow the horn and yell at them. For me to stand up here and say I'm perfect and I don't have, if it doesn't irritate me in life and that this doesn't happen to me, I would be lying. And I would need to take a front seat and say, forgive me for lying. This is one of those areas that I have to work on myself. So I'm not just standing up here. I want someone to say, well, Jonathan, you're standing up and preaching to us like you're perfect. I'm not. It's one of those areas that we all have to work on. But I want us to think about when we're speaking, are we truly meaning the things we say, regardless of the situation? If someone angers us, do we take the time to stop and think about what our reply is going to be? Or we just say the first thing that flows off of our tongue? I've had to teach myself that a lot through the years. Stop and think about what you're going to say. And I'm still working on it. And if the Lord blesses me with another 70 years of life or so, at 100 to 110 years old, I'll still be working on it. But for those of us who are Christians, this is something we have to think about. We have to stop and say, are my words going to be worthy of being said? If the Lord were standing beside of me, if he were here with me, would it be okay for me to give the reply I'm about to give, and in the manner I'm going to give it? I want us to think about, where do the words come from? Where do our words come from that come from our mouth? You know, we talk about this and we say, what comes from our minds? But what is our minds? Our minds are our hearts. In Matthew chapter 15, Jesus speaks in that chapter of defilement coming from within. It comes from our hearts. It is making a statement of where our heart is. Now we get angry, our tempers flare, and yes, things can be said that aren't truly meant. But that's where we have to train ourselves to stop and think about what we're about to say. How's it going to affect me? How's it going to affect the one hearing it? How's it going to affect those who are around me hearing what I'm saying to that person? But ultimately, how's it going to affect my relationship with God? How's it going to make my relationship with God? Is it going to better it? Or is it going to make it worse? Is it going to make me realize that I'm a growing Christian, or I'm someone who needs to reach up to the Father and say, I've fallen down. I have some serious problems. James over in James chapter 3, and I encourage you to turn over here because we'll read quite a few of these verses. In James chapter 3, I want us to think about this. I want us to think about James chapter 3 and what James has to say here about how our tongues affect us. He begins in verse 1. He says, "My brethren, let not many of you become teachers, knowing that we shall receive a stricter judgment. For we all stumble in many things. If anyone does not stumble in word, he is a perfect man, able also to bridle the whole body. Indeed, we put bits in horses' mouths that they may obey us, and we turn their whole body. Look also at ships. Although they are large and are driven by fierce winds, they are turned by a very small rudder wherever the pilot desires." Now listen to what he begins here in verse 5. He says, "Even so," just like a bridle in a horse's mouth or the rudder on a ship, he says, "Even so the tongue is a little member, yet boasts great things. See how great a forest a little fire kindles. The tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity. The tongue is so set among our members that it defiles the entire body, sets on fire the course of nature, and is set on fire by hell. For every kind of beast and bird, of reptile and creature of the sea is tamed and has been tamed by mankind. But no man can tame the tongue. It's an unruly evil, full of deadly poison. With it, we bless our God and Father, and with it, we curse men who've been made in the similitude of God. Out of the same mouth proceed blessings and cursings. My brethren, these things ought not to be so. Does a spring send forth fresh and bitter water from the same opening? Can a fig tree, my brethren, bear olives, or a grapevine bear figs? Thus no spring would ever yield both salt and fresh water." Think about what he's saying here. Our tongues, the simple little thing that causes the syllables that come out that I'm speaking to you right now, provide what's ultimately written on the heart. The words that we speak provide a great deal of information. They tell others who we are. Now think about this. You've never met someone. You walk up to them and you begin talking to them. What's the first thing that you do as you're talking with them and they're replying to your questions or the comments you're making? What are they doing to you and what are you doing to them? You're automatically assessing them. You're assessing their educational background. You're assessing their attitude. You're assessing the type of person they are. You're seeing how they respond to that. Are they responding in a hasty way? Are they responding in an angry way? Do they respond kindly and gently? How people speak about themselves and others and how they talk back and talk to people it speaks volumes. For children, and I'm sure that everyone's heard this, but my parents told me growing up, however you talk to people outside of this house reflects on us and how we raised you. How we talk and how we act outside these walls not only reflects on our physical parents, but it reflects on our Father in heaven. People will go out here and they'll say, well, gee, if such and such can act like that and he goes to church all the time and he says he's going to heaven, well, I can act like that and not go to church and still go to heaven. I don't need to go to church just to do that. It leaves a wrong impression. We need to be watching how we conduct ourselves with others. We need to be careful what comes out. The mind is the greatest computer ever devised. Many people don't think of it that way. When a computer is built, do you get anything out of it? No. There must be a programmer. There has to be data put into that, inputted, in order to get it back. We have to input. We have to input goodness. We have to input godliness. But if we see that we are down to the point that we have ungodliness, that we have things that are not what they ought to be, now's the time to begin to heal that sick heart, to be able to try to tame the tongue. James says we'll never fully tame it. We'll never fully control it. We can do our best to. When we're striving to, as I spoke of this morning, we're filling ourselves with the pure water of life that flows only from the fountain, that flows from the throne of God. Will we purge the impurities out? Then we'll begin to have that time of healing, that time of refreshing, and be able to begin coming back to a right manner. If we find ourselves in a position that things are coming out of our mouth and coming off of our heart, does that mean that I cannot be healed? No. Just as I and many of you and most of you here go to the doctor when you're sick, we have a great physician to whom we can go. Back in 2016, I went to the doctor. They told me, you have cancer. Well, of course, that one little word caused me and Ashley to have ringing in our ears for a little bit. But once that initial shock wore off, we realized we can go to the doctor. There are doctors who can cure this illness. And just like those doctors were able to treat and to kill that cancer, there's a doctor or a great physician who can take the spiritual cancer out of our lives. In Matthew chapter 4, beginning in verse 23 and following, we read that Jesus not only cleansed people physically, but he also drove out demons. And he started to cleanse them spiritually. He was able to do both. He did both things. He cleansed them. He showed in his earthly ministry that what he was going to do once he ascended back to the Father on high. He no longer miraculously cleanses us of physical ailments, nor do we have to worry about having demon possessions like they did when Christ was on the earth. But he's able to cure. He's able to free us from that bondage of sin. He's able to take that, lift that weight off of us, and place it where it no longer burdens us down. It no longer ails us. Jesus says to bring everything to him. And believe me, this passage can fit into any situation in life. Matthew chapter 11, verses 28 through 30. I can't use it enough. Every aspect of our life. Here Jesus says to bring everything to him. Because his yoke is easy and his burden is light. I can't make it through this world alone. Oh, I can. I can try to go through it alone. But the burden is going to be too great to bear, and we'll have spiritual death at the end of the line. Bring myself back to where he says I need to be. And when I begin drinking of the pure waters of life, and I start bringing myself back and seeing the great physician, and he begins to remove the illness from me, begins to take the sickness from me, and I'm turning all my burdens and cares over to him. He says in James chapter 1, verse 27, he says to visit the widows and orphans. Why would we do that? Why would we need to go out and visit those who are fatherless, parentless, those who have lost a spouse? Puts things back in perspective for us. No matter how far we think we have went down to the bottom of the barrel, no matter how bad we think we have it, if we'll stop and take a look around, there are always those who are far worse off than we are. That's what we're being reminded of here in verse 27 in James chapter 1. Go visit the widows and orphans. Bring that perspective back into your heart. Believe me, it'll do you a world of good. Make you begin to count your many blessings. You may not have the largest bank account coming and going. May not have the fanciest cars. May not have the name brand clothing to wear. But the Lord blesses us with housing, food to nourish our physical bodies, a church family we can rely on, physical families to rely on. But we can also take a look back over in Titus chapter 2. Another way for us to be able to learn, and for us to learn how to and pass to future generations on how to visit those who are widows and orphans. Titus chapter 2 Paul elaborates in that chapter on how the older women are to be an example, are to, in a sense, tutor the younger ladies on how to be godly wives, how to be godly mothers, how to be upright women in society. It also speaks to the older men to be examples to the younger men. Thus completing the circle. If we look at how it all begins, if we're living godly lives, if we're living the way we ought to, we have parents who are raising their children to be godly children. When those children begin to hit life's speed bumps and hit those bumps along the way, they get turned back around and they bring them back. From young to old to older, but the circle continues to go round and around. And the example is continuously given. And we can be an influence to those around us, not just parents to children, parents to other parents. When students go to school, they can be examples to their classmates, to our friends and neighbors, to other family members. The examples go on and on. They say that the most influential Bible lesson that a lot of people will ever hear is what they see a Christian living in their daily lives. And how we speak to others and how we communicate with them is where it all begins. My question is, where do we stand? And that's not going to go to a black screen for some reason. My question is, where do we stand this evening? Are we in a position that we can rightfully say, I'm trying my best to correct my ways, to control my language, to tailor my language to be that which the Lord would have it to be? Or is it something that still needs worked on? And just because it still needs worked on doesn't mean that you're condemned. Remember, go to your Father in prayer. Bow before the throne of God, taking your cares, your worries to Him in prayer. Ask Him for the strength that it takes to get through your daily life. When I was in school, I had a classmate that was a year ahead of me. He said, the best way I found to pray is to name all my problems to God. He said, the Lord already knows what my problems are. He said, but if I name them off one by one as an itemized list, it helps me put things in perspective. And it reminds me of where the work needs to be done in my own life. I'm glad he said that, because I'm able to implement that in my own life and remind myself that there are a lot of things that I need to work on. And I'm sure you all have a lot of things that need worked on too, if you be honest with yourself and honest with the Lord. Itemize those things when you pray to God. And count your blessings. Name them off one by one also. Make sure you block out about 2 hours worth of time for that prayer, because it'll take you a while to go through all the blessings and all your needs. There's nothing wrong with that. That's the reason Jesus in Matthew chapter 11 told us to bring everything to him and lay him at his feet. Let us not have tongues of death, but let us have tongues that express the word of God, express joy, express godliness, love, compassion, and show others around us that we have been given over to the loving arms of Jehovah God and none other. If you're in this assembly this evening and you need to make amends with your Father in heaven, whatever the need may be, I invite you to come take a front seat while together we stand and sing.